Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the editorial director with Data Science Central and also chief data scientist for Data Magnum. Now, I'd like to start off our event today by thanking FICO for sponsoring today's event. FICO is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. Now, today's webinar is entitled Creating Business Applications with R and Python, and that'll be presented by FICO. But before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format for today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have two presenters who I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation, and today's event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. Now, I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation, as we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Bill Doyle and Libin Varghese with FICO. Now, Bill is Vice President of Decision Management Solutions at FICO with 25 years of experience in the advanced analytics industry. In his current role, Bill's responsible for driving sales execution and customer success for FICO Decision Management Solutions. Now, previously, he served in executive positions at RapidMiner, Tibco, Spotfire, Netezza, and MicroStrategy. And Bill has his BS in computer science from Penn State University. Now, Libin is a principal sales consultant in decision management solutions at FICO. He has 8 years of experience applying advanced analytics to solve clients' real-world challenges. He currently builds and configures end-to-end solutions with FICO Xpress across a wide range of industries, including financial services, transportation, and supply chain management. He has an MS in Operations Research and Industrial Engineering from the University of Texas in Austin. So, Bill, Libin, hey, thank you for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Now, across industries, data scientists are creating powerful models and analytics to solve urgent business problems. However, in far too many of these cases, these analytics never reach their intended business users. The result is wasted time and effort, as well as failure to achieve the fundamental goal of transforming data and analytics into valuable solutions. So in today's Data Science Central webinar, you'll see how data science teams can stop this trend and start putting analytics into action. With FICO Xpress Insight, it's easy to take any advanced analytic asset, such as an R or Python script, and turn it into a fully functioning application for business users. So we'll demonstrate some key features, including an environment that fosters collaboration between data scientists and business users during model creation, a robust interface for rapidly deploying validated models into business user-friendly applications, and enablement tools for business users to run models, perform simulations, and compare scenarios and visualize outcomes. So with FICO, data scientists can finally stop seeing their efforts go to waste and start empowering business users with predictive and prescriptive analytics capable of transforming business today, and you'll learn more. So, Bill, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin just as soon as you're ready to go.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for making the time to join us today. This is Bill Doyle, and as Bill Voorhees introduced us all, I'm the VP of Sales for the Decision Management Solutions Group. And today we're excited to share with you our portfolio that's going to enable you, data scientists, to build advanced analytic applications, specifically leveraging your R and Python investments. Now, before we get started, we want to learn a little bit more about you. We're going to start with a poll here that will allow you to tell us what role you represent at your companies. And I believe your screen should allow you to select one of these particular roles. I'm seeing the stats build as we go, so I'll show this here in a second. And not surprisingly, we're seeing the largest group here is data scientists. Thank you for participating in the poll. So first, a little background on FICO and why we have a solution for you. Most of you know us from the FICO credit score, but I suspect few of you know FICO is a billion-dollar technology company. And while we are better known for our scores business, our larger business is actually our software division, which is a $700 million business. And you can boil that into two general areas, applications and platforms. And Lib and I represent our core platform, the Decision Management Suite, excuse me. We'll let this build out. So what do we mean by decision management? Every tech provider that offers some form of analytics uses the phrase turning insights into action. Well, the reality is while many of these folks can and deliver on discovering the insights, very few are truly enabling you to take an action. Now, we view decision management as a combination of three general capabilities. Advanced analytics, which is the predictive analytics aspect. Optimization, given any number of constraints, what paths should be taken to achieve your objective, and this is more associated with the concept of prescriptive analytics. But then the last element here is rules, which is enabling you to execute on a decision, whether it being on a manual basis or an automated basis. And that's typically the missing piece to most vendors' offerings, is not having that ability to turn it into an action. And what we find, and is validated by the analyst community, is that firms that leverage a combination of all three of these capabilities derive the most value from their analytics investments. Sorry, the build out here. So if we drill a bit further into the functional capabilities, there is a broad spectrum of technical capabilities necessary to enable the very many different types of decisioning applications. And these can range from those that do such as decision support. Imagine I'm a phone plan manager at a telco, and I want to run a churn analysis to determine subscribers at risk. Well, I'm not necessarily taking an action in this scenario, but I want to get visibility into who might be churning and what might happen as a result of that. But then you have more sophisticated, highly automated decisioning applications that are transactional. For example, we, FICO, offer a loan origination solution. And when someone submits a loan application, the system will run a series of models in real time, leveraging hundreds of attributes relevant to the applicant, but in addition, in tandem to the objectives of the loan originator. In this case, the action here is presenting loan packages that are relevant to both the applicant and the originator's objectives. So to enable this spectrum of capabilities, we offer the Decision Management Suite, which is a complete portfolio of components that provide the necessary functional and technical capabilities to build and deploy these different types of applications. Now, I'm not going to go through all these elements. I just wanted to share with you the depth and breadth of our platform. But for today's discussions, we're going to focus on one part of this platform that enables you to build applications from your R and Python scripts. And now the big problem. Oh, sorry, I missed a poll question here. Or I went too fast, didn't I? Nope, the poll question here. Please let us know, how are you deploying predictive models today? A lot of good answers coming in. And not surprisingly, we're seeing, and you'll see the results here in a second, that the two largest categories are, one, we don't know or we don't deploy models, which is not a good thing. And the second is, not surprising, the data scientists are running their models and delivering the results themselves. And that's not surprising at all. This is what we're seeing in the market today. Which brings us to exactly the point of this presentation, the big problem here, which we call the last mile problem. Despite all the advances in making it easier to deliver to build artificial intelligence and machine learning models, companies are failing to deliver them into production. And the number one reason why the projects fail is this inability to deliver it in anything that the business can use. So what we need to do here is enable the data scientist who, in their daily life, is trying to deliver solutions to their business users. And the typical life cycle of model development, data prep, model validation, test and learn, But at the end of the day, it's this last step, the last mile, where you have different types of use cases that people are trying to use these models. And so the concept of operationalizing is trying to put this precious asset in the hands of these business users. So with that said, you have two different ends of the spectrum here, back to my concept of decision support and decision automation use cases. And it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. So at the end of the day, wouldn't it be great to have a framework that could let you to build applications for your users, but also do it in a way that requires nominal investment or involvement from IT? Now, there's one other challenge here to be thinking about. The needs of the business analyst are different than the needs of you, the data scientist. The business user needs business context. While you can provide lots of stats and math elements that you typically work with, it's the end user or the business user that needs to have things in their context. Now let's think about kind of the conditioning that's going on in the world. Today, when you think about using a cell phone or any application space, you log in, you get a suite of applications that you can select that are for a particular solution, and boom, you're delivered with a set of easy-to-use applications. Well, in the analytics world, that's not an easy thing to do. Further, you need to make sure that you're also considered here. It's not just about providing applications that are used by the end user, but it's also making sure that you are being able to get what you need out of this, such as notebooks and other elements that are driven by the actual modeling tools of choice. Which brings us to FICO Insight. FICO Xpress Insight is an application development and management framework purpose-built for analytic applications. Instead of you repeating the process of building out the common components of an end-user application, Xpress Insight delivers the core building blocks in a repeatable framework that can be shared with the rest of the data science team. And a very important feature here, the framework facilitates collaboration between the data scientist business user. It's not the traditional siloed approach. Instead of the typical back and forth of email exchanges and swapping files, you're going to be able to engage with your business user for the entire model lifecycle. Now, the Insight product was actually born from our optimization technology stack, and they used it as a means to develop applications leveraging our solver engine. Fortunately for us, the engineers had the foresight to develop this framework to be agnostic to the model creation environment. So in essence, it can consume models from just about any model language environment. We have hundreds of customers using Insight-based applications in a wide variety of use cases. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Libin, who's going to give you more details about Xpress Insight and a demo to show how it works. Libin?
Thanks, Bill. So I want to quickly start off by running this poll that we have over here to understand what languages that you're currently using to build predictive models currently in your organization. So there are a wide variety of languages that we have over here on the screen. So please select, it's a multi-select, so please select all the languages that you're using currently. All right, you can see that the results are coming in. And yep, it's as expected. A large variety of you, or a large number of you are using R and Python. Some of them are using SAS, and then we have a smaller distribution towards the bottom. All right, great. So I want to jump into the demo over here right now. So with this understanding, so what we're going to talk about is basically how do you deploy your R and Python models using Xpress Insight. In the next 20 or so minutes that I have for the talk, going back to Bill's comment about how 50% of these models are not getting to the business user, I like to think of it as, in the next 20 minutes of my talk, there are going to be hundreds of these models across the world that are going to be sitting on shelves, unable to get to its intended business users. And now think of a world where you could, with some configuration, deploy your models to your business users in a standardized, enterprise-ready, and scalable manner without having to depend on scarce IT resources for deploying. I want to introduce you to FICO Xpress Insight and convince you that it can help you to do exactly that, deploy advanced analytic models at the speed of development. to demonstrate this, let's set a stage for a simple use case that we'll use for the demo. We're going to be part of a telecom provider, someone that provides some subscription services like AT&T or T-Mobile, etc. And across all of my markets every day or every month, a fraction of my subscribers leaves to go to the competition. This is called as churn, and this is what we're interested in predicting or forecasting in this particular example. Let's also set the stage for two types of users that we're going to talk about today, the data scientist and the business user. The data scientist is the person who oversees the data, building of the models. They're also in charge of recalibrating the models, etc. The business users are the experts, in this particular case, the telecom space. They oversee coming up with service plans and are responsible for the financial performance of the company. They use the models that the data scientist has built for them to make day-to-day decisions. For example, what promotion do I need to run to reduce churn? So let's take a look at how things are currently being performed in this particular company. So I'm sharing my screen over here, and what we're looking at is R Studio. So the data scientists are using R to build their churn models, and they're using R Studio as a development environment for R. So let's see what they have built so far. There are two functions here. One is a recalibrate function, which when run will update the coefficients of the model. The second function is a score function, which will predict churn for a given set of accounts based on a start date and an end date. Everything from the model building side is great and on track. But now, how does the data scientist get the scoring function that my business user is interested in to the business user so that they can in turn run it, get the churn forecast, and make business decisions? One way to do that is to give them a self-contained executable, right, that they can execute from, say, command prompt. The output of this is an Excel file with all the predictions. They can peruse the Excel file, figure out if it's giving the results that they're looking for. If they want to change something, they come back to the command prompt, change one of these runtime arguments, and kick off a new run. And once you have a new run, you get another Excel file that you can now compare with your first one and see how the results have changed. Now, we are operationalizing analytics here with this approach, right? You're using command prompt and Excel, but the business users have run the models, and they're able to get some business value out of it. But now let's see how we can take this to the next level by using Xpress Insight. So I want to go the reverse direction over here. I want to start with the data scientist in this particular case. So I'm a business user, and I've come into work, grabbed my coffee, and my manager just asked me what our churn looks like for 2019. And I've been working with our data science team on validating the models that they've built. So let's take a look at how the latest version is performing. How do I access Xpress Insight? I just open up my trusted browser, and I log in with my user credentials. And once I'm in Xpress Insight, I have access to all of the applications that my data science team has built for me. They're all sitting side by side, much like on your iPhones or Androids. I come to one single place to access all of my applications without needing any custom software installations other than my browser, right? So you can have Chrome, Internet Explorer, and you'll be able to access Xpress Insight. So what I'm looking for in this particular case, I'm interested in churn. So this is the application that my data science team has built for me. So I'm going to go into that one. Let's take a quick tour of this application over here. So we have a view navigator that basically lists out all of the views that I have access to in this application. We have a scenario explorer. And what this does is this exposes a fundamental concept of Insight, which is scenarios. Every scenario is an execution of the model, the same R model, with its own set of inputs and outputs. You can create as many scenarios as you need to aid your analysis. And the best thing is that you can compare them with each other. So for now, let's choose this one scenario, and let's take a look at one report to understand how my customers are churning in 2019, because that's what my manager has asked me, right? So I can now take a look at the output of the model in a clean visualization over here that shows how churn is predicted across these various segments that I'm interested in. So if I look at churn by tenure, I can see that as the customers who have been with me for the longest, they tend to be more loyal, so churn is minimal for that particular group of people. People who have just joined my service, they have a higher tendency to churn. Same goes for charges. So people who have been spending a lot with my carrier tend to have lower churn compared to those who basically are on say a month-to-month plan, and that's what we see here at the bottom as well. We see that as a plan tenure increases or the plan length increases, we have less and less churn. So I have a lot of views in here that I can take a look at. And I can, to understand my forecast, I can take a look at my overview over here to see what's happening. And I noticed one thing that's funny over here. So I have, a set of 5,000 customers that I've run this simulation for. And I noticed that when I look at the churn across the months, I see something that's not great. So basically that the churn is not as, or the seasonality has a limited effect on the churn. So I typically like to see more churn, or I have seen more churn in the summer months, so say in August, and I've seen much lower churns in the winter months around January. So based on my business knowledge, this doesn't look right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this scenario with my data scientist, and I want to see if we can improve this. So I'm going to go in and move this to my data scientist over here so that he or she has now access to this particular scenario. So I'm going to move this over, and the scenario has gone away from me, but now let me log into the same Express Insight from a separate browser just to simulate how different people access it. The data scientist is accessing this through exactly the same way that the business user is, right, through a browser. So the data scientist logs in, and I have the set of applications that I'm working on. You'll notice that I have way more applications than that particular business user because I tend to work on a lot more projects. So if I go into the same app, Churn Forecasting, one thing you'll notice quickly off the bat is that I have a lot more views compared to my business user. What does that mean? That means that the same application can have multiple views, each tailored for a specific user persona. In fact, anything on the UI can be controlled based on who's looking at them. So we can control what buttons are clickable, what fields are visible, basically anything in the UI. So for now, let me pick on this scenario that my business user has sent to me for review. So once I come up here, I'm going to go into one of the views that are specific to me that the business user wasn't able to see. And over here, you'll quickly notice that I have a lot of things that I can do or tweak or change for this particular scenario. And how is this possible? So this is possible because of two reasons. One, because I parameterize my R code, right? So my R code is able to take all of these inputs. And two, because Insight makes it so easy to bring these parameters to the user interface without the need of web development skills. We'll take a look at that in a few minutes from now. But for now, let's see how we can look at this more, or look at the scenario and change something over here. So I've heard from my user that the month is not showing up, or the seasonality is not showing up. So what I can do over here is I can clone the scenario, and I can call it something like this over here. So what that basically does is it creates a brand new scenario for me. And I select this particular scenario. So now that's the scenario that we have over here on the shelf. And I'm going to add month as a predictive or an independent variable to that particular scenario, right? So I've selected month. And once I do that, I'm going to run or recalibrate this model over here. So I'm just going to quickly do that analysis over here. So what's happening, the R code, the same R code, is executing with these new parameters that we have set, specifically the month predictor. Now, once that's done, I can go into this other view that I have over here, which basically shows me some statistics or some reports into the model that we have just run. So the cool thing is, I can pick up the old scenario, which my user sent over, and I can bring it side by side over here in Xpress Insight. So here I have two scenarios on the shelf, as we call it, and anything you see on the view is basically the data from both of those scenarios. So here I have my first scenario, and here I have my second scenario. So I can see that now the scenario where I added in the months, I have a couple of new months that have become significant. So August, Jan, and May are significant. Some of the other months are not as significant. I also have an ROC plot, a cross-validation plot, a lift curve, etc. Right? So basically, we can pull in whatever views that you want from the modeling language into Xpress Insight over here, so that you can have this multi-scenario comparison. All right. So all of these look good to me, and I'm going to share this scenario back with my business user. So I'm going to pick my business user, and I'm going to move it back to the business user. So let's go back to the business user. So now I'm back here as the business user, as you'll see over here on the top right. So I'm the analyst, and now you'll see that I have this new scenario over here that I can test and see. One thing I also need to do is send back the original scenario. So I'm just going to do that quickly as well. All right, so now that I have both scenarios over here, I can bring them side by side, and I can take a look at what's happening. Now, before that, I need to rerun my simulation, right? So my simulation was based on my old model, so now I have my particular scenario in here. I'm going to just run the simulation with the new model. So once I do that, what's happening is, and what you will see is, over here, the charts have changed. So now I'm seeing more seasonality for this new model that has come in. And this looks right to me. So this is what makes sense from a business perspective. And what we have done is we have incorporated the feedback or the changes from the business user directly over here into the UI. So let's take a step back. What do we see so far? From the business user's perspective, we have a nice and clean web interface that only requires a browser to run the models. You have clean and crisp visualizations to look at the results. You have what-if analysis capabilities that let you run multiple scenarios and compare them side by side. And most importantly, you have this ability to interact with the data science team during the model development phase so that what is being built can be validated and immediately used. So we are empowering the business users to do what-if analysis at the speed of thought. If they want to test something, just clone a scenario, change the parameters, run it, and then compare the results side by side. All right, so I know what you're all thinking, at least the data scientists in here are definitely thinking this. How did the R model that we saw in our studio end up in Insight? How do we have all of these visuals without a web developer? So let's peel back the layers and let's take a look at some of those things. So first off, let's go back to this R model here. The data scientist continues to build the R models or the models in R, right? And this could very well be Python as well. The key point is that Xpress Insight does not force you to change, I repeat, does not force you to change what predictive language you use, right? We just help you deploy these models. So over here, what I'm interested in exposing to my users is this core model function and this recalibrate model function, right? So for now, let's just focus on this recalibrate model function. Let's see how we take this function into or show it in Xpress Insight, right? So there are two main building blocks when you build an application in Xpress Insight. One is Moselle. Moselle is the orchestration language that connects your models that are built in Python and R to Xpress Insight. The second component is View Definition Language, or VDL. This is the no-code web UI creation layer that lets you build those user interfaces without web development skills. There's also the third optional building block, Tableau. So any report that you saw, or actually some of the reports that you saw today were built using Tableau. So Insight has a tight integration with Tableau, which lets you build any visualization that you want in Tableau and use that within your applications. So we'll quickly take a look at these components and see how all of the integrations work. Let's start with Moselle. So here's my R model, right? So here's the R function that I have. How do we bring that into Moselle? What you're seeing on the screen now is Express Workbench. So Express Workbench is the development environment that is used to build Insight applications. So over here, I've just narrowed down the code to show you the portion that's integrating with R, or that's calling the R function. So I have a procedure here, and this procedure basically has a couple of functions, right? So there's a function called reval. And what this reval function does is basically it executes any R model or any R function here in Moselle, right? So what that means is that there is this in-memory connection between Moselle and R, so that all of these functions can be executed in R. So here is the recalibrate model function, right? So here's a recalibrate model function, and I am passing it some values, albeit hard-coded. We'll take a look at how you parameterize it. Once this function is executed, I am getting the data back from R into a Moselle entity called churn score. So there's an in-memory integration between R and Moselle, which means that I don't need to resort to any file I/O. I can just pass data through code. And that's the same thing how it looks like with Python as well. So there is another function called pyexec, and using that you can execute Python models and Python models or functions, and then you can get data back from Python using an initializations block. And what that does is it pulls the data from Python into Moselle, right? So in-memory integration. Let's take a look at an example where we parameterize two of the arguments of this function, right? So specifically the cross-validation sample percentage and the sample size, right? So here what I've done is I have declared, so in Moselle you declare some entities. So I've declared two entities, and this is what the user will set in the UI, which we'll take a look at in the next 2 minutes. So basically whatever the user sets here, we're going to pass it into this R function, right? So all of these stay the same, but we pass in two non-hard-coded entities into R. All right, so let's take a look at now how we expose this to the user interface, right? And that's where the second building block comes in, which is VDL, or View Definition Language. So what does that look like? So let me put the user interface right next to this page over here. So here's what we want to build. So we want to build this top portion over here using without using any web development or without using any HTML or CSS, right? So this portion over here is what I want to focus on, specifically this portion over here. So the way you build something in VDL, so VDL is XML, or is using XML, right? So underneath it's using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of those things. But as a developer, I don't need to care about all of that. What I do need to set up though is a structure, right? So over here I am defining a tag called as page. So within a page I have a section. Within a section I have a couple of rows. So if you take a look at one of these rows over here, which is this portion that I have over here, it's a form. It's a form that's inviting the business user to add some things in there. So these three lines that I have over here is creating these three lines that I have over here on the top. So I'm using exactly the entities in Moselle. So I'm saying I need a field with this entity, and that shows up as this over here. No other hidden tricks, right? So it's just that. So you specify these three lines, and you get these three over here. And Insight does a lot of the heavy lifting over here. Insight does a lot of heavy lifting with respect to what scenario am I looking at. There's a database behind this, right? So obviously, if you have all of these scenarios for doing what-if analysis, there's a big database behind that actually holds all of the scenarios and who's accessing it and the users and all of those things. As a developer, I don't need to care about any of that. So Insight takes care of all of that for me, managing this across scenarios, managing things across users, managing some things like even data validation, right? So it doesn't let me enter a text into a field that is clearly an integer or a real. Let's look at what it takes to build this table that you have down here. So I'm going to close this guy. This table is created simply with this one line, right? So in Moselle, I have an array that basically has 2 columns. And with this one line, we have this beautiful table that we have over here on the left. So Insight through VDL lets you create all of these views by using simple XML. Super simple. Now, one other key aspect I want to point out here is the ability to make fast updates. So you'll notice that this over here, this table over here is editable, right? So the user can change this. Let's say at some point you don't want to make this editable. I can change this editable tag to false. I can publish my new project, or I can publish this to the server, and you'll see immediately that it's updating over here, right? And now this has become non-editable. So the users, my users, will immediately see the change, rapid deployment, right? So it's super easy to iterate between versions with Express Insight. So you can also use VDL to build simple visualizations as well. So I mentioned Tableau, but you can also use VDL to build some of these reports. So I can have, so these charts over here are built very similarly to how you would specify it or build a table. So you write some XML, basically 2 lines to build something that you see over here. So that's another way of building visualizations in addition to Tableau. So you can also use Tableau, right, to build visualizations like you saw earlier. It's very easy to pass data between Insight and Tableau and have great multi-user views. So I'm not going to talk a lot about Tableau over here, but essentially just think of this as you can have any of these visuals that you're seeing over here built in Tableau and integrate that with the application, right? So Tableau has a wide variety of features that you can use, a wide variety of types of reports that you can use, and you can basically tie in whichever or whatever data you want from your R or Python models into Tableau and show that to the user in a multi-scenario setting over here. Now, the third way that you can build something, Insight, is a web-based interface, right? So this is on the web. So you can basically have, you can basically use any third-party JavaScript library in your applications, right? So if you do have those HTML skills or CSS skills or JavaScript skills, you can take full power of this platform. You can build or you can bring in any third-party library and make them available here. What you get access to is this whole scenario what-if capability of Insight that you can leverage to build cool views. All right, so one last thing or one final thing I want to talk from the code perspective is how do you tie some of these actions from the user back into the code, right? So here I have a button that basically is running the churn model. So how does that work from the perspective of the code? It's super easy. What's happening is basically there is a function that tells Insight or that tells this Moselle code what the user is clicking on the user interface. So if the user clicks a calibrate button, Moselle being a procedural language, basically executes whatever is in here. So it's getting some attachments, it's running a function, and it's pushing back some results back into the interface. If the user is clicking simulate, then you're basically running a different set of functions, right? So what this lets you do is it enables you as a developer to create complex workflows in your app, right? So in your app, step 1 could be to run an R model, show the results to the user, and allow the user to make any changes. Feed that back into step 2, which may be running a Python model, right? So think of this as a platform that lets you also orchestrate various models that you have. So you can, to your end user though, the business user, it's a single cohesive application, right? So what they're looking at is basically one button that kicks off one step, and then there is another button that kicks off another step, right? Behind the scenes, you could have multiple models that are talking to each other. Super powerful. All right, so I want to close out the demo by looking at a real-world application, right? So let me bring up one application that I want to show over here. This application basically captures the essence of what Xpress Insight can do for your business user, right? So so far what we have looked at is how you can take these predictive models, or how you can have this code development environment where you're building a model with your business user, and then eventually you're going to take some action on it, right? So in this particular example, what we have is a combination of predictive models with user inputs, with optimization, and some neat visualizations, right? So this is a school bus routing problem, right? So I have 19 students, each marked on this map, that I need to pick up with my bus fleet, right? So I have a set number of buses. In this particular case, I'm using 2 buses. There's a predictive model right behind this that's driving how long it takes to go from point A to point B on this map, and it's factoring in things like traffic and all of those things, time of day, etc. And that predictive model is feeding into a vehicle routing algorithm that basically defines how the buses should go to pick up all of the students. Now, to the business user, this is transparent, right? So she doesn't see what's behind the scenes or what models are being running. What they do is they come in, they're interested in the scenario that they're working at and the students that they have to pick up for a particular day or for a particular week. So they come in here, run the optimization, see the results. If, say, there's something else that they need to add in, they can go in here, add a new student, and then once you add a new student, it asks you to re-optimize. So I can go in here and re-optimize my scenario. And what that does is it'll give me a new result that basically picks up this new student over here. I can also do cool things like I can say, oh, this particular route over here, that's actually closed, and I know that it is closed. So why don't you go ahead and add an exclusion zone over here so that you go around that, and I can do a re-optimization to see how that happens. So you see now here that I have this exclusion zone, so it's bypassing that and going back to the user. So hopefully, through this demo, it's clear, or it's at least clear that how easily you can deploy analytic models written or Python in a single standardized platform for both the business users and the data scientists. And also, I want to, even though our talk was around R and Python, Xpress Insight can deploy your other models as well. So you can deploy SAS models, Julia models, whatnot, right? So Moselle allows the sorry about that. Moselle allows that connection between your predictive models to this business user interface that your business users can use. All right, and with that, I want to send it back to Bill.
Okay. Thanks, Libin. So, some takeaways from what we just saw, right? Number one, and hopefully it was clear as a bell, the collaboration. And that's a key element of this, is that what you saw Libin do was interact with the data scientist, or the interaction between the data scientist and the business analyst in being able to help in the whole testing and validation phase of which models to use, and being able to help participate in running the different elements and driving to what ultimately is the model that gets delivered. But taking that a step further, it's also then showing a full-built application that's intended for the end user on a day-to-day basis. The bus driver example is not about the collaboration. It's about each day that person might need decision support applications going to let them figure out which bus routing to take. So the single framework, Insights, facilitating 2 very different application scenarios. And equally important is the last aspect we highlighted in the beginning part of the presentation, which is being able to turn that insight into an action. And then another example from the bus driver example was you actually saw a calculation that resulted in a decision being taken that I should need to change the route from point A to point B. So all in all, the framework as a whole is solving this last mile problem. So just highlighting some of the benefits here, you saw simulations being run, you saw scenarios, the ability for folks to save a scenario and do a comparison. That is very different than some of the applications you might be thinking about just using some of the visual analytics tools as a front end. This is a very different paradigm in that you're being able to save and store information and ultimately run these comparisons and look at them interactively. To the data scientist, you benefit tremendously. Really, when it's all said and done, it's about making your life easier, enabling this collaboration, reusable components, reducing your backlog, and ultimately focusing your time on what you like most, the data science and solving business problems. So with that, as a next step here, we really would like people to download the FICO Xpress Insight product. We have a community version on our community site that is free. Gives you pretty much all the functionality that you want or need to at least get a taste of Express. We offer a full library of information and documents for those that sign up for the after of this event. We're going to send you links to where to download, getting started materials, etc. Everything's published live for you to get self-enabled. So my ask and next step for you all is to please download the product and begin the process of using Insight. So with that, we're going to turn it over to the Q&A portion.
Well, Bill Libin, thank you so much for that great presentation. And we'll get started with today's Q&A session. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. I had a lot of questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. And so during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for Bill and Libin if you'd like to contact them following today's webinar. So let's get started. Question from the audience, a basic technical question about who needs to have an install and a license, and I presume here that the emphasis is on business users. So the question is, does every user have to install Insight?
And the answer to that is no. Data scientists or people that are working with Insight to do development or model creation and or ultimately publishing an Insight application require the Insight application. But the business users that are going to interact with the applications, that's all done via the web interface.
Well, thanks for that clarification. And kind of on a similar vein, the audience would like to know exactly what other visualization and BI tools are compatible with Insight, and they particularly asked about Click and Shiny. Presumably there are others.
Libin?
Sure, I can take that. So out of the box, Express Insight integrates with Tableau, right? So Tableau can be used to build all of your visualizations. In addition to that, with VDL or View Definition Language, you can build some basic charts like pie charts, line charts, or bar graphs, etc. In addition to that, you can also bring in third-party libraries, right? So third-party JavaScript libraries that you can use to build any custom visualizations that you want. For items like ClickView or Shiny, you would have to have that sitting outside the application. So all the data in the application is available for these other libraries to use, but that wouldn't show up within that same application.
Well, Libin, thanks for that clarification. And on that same topic, does this mean that I would need to have a separate Tableau license in order to integrate Tableau with Insight?
That is correct. So to use the optional Tableau component, you would have to have a license for Tableau Server. Now, if you already have Enterprise Tableau at your organization, you can pretty much reuse that for Express Insight.
Well, Libin, thanks so much for that clarification.
Just one other thing, Bill. We also offer the ability to sell Tableau licenses specifically for use with Insight.
Ah, very handy. Thanks, Bill. Now, this is kind of a fun question. I know that you all focused on the implementation and how to productize or get the models into production. The question is much broader than that. It talks about, well, okay, if 50% of all our machine learning projects fail to get implemented, is that really about the failure to implement, or is it about the failure of users to understand what they want or to know how to use it? And maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about the collaboration features of Insight and how that might help the first half of that question.
It's a great philosophical question and really is the foundation of what our presentation is all about. So the answer is it's both when it's all said and done, right? We found in the market was there wasn't really a purpose-built framework to delivering analytic applications, which is why we're really bringing Insight here to the masses. Having said that, I completely agree with the writer of the question that a lot of times the business users don't know what they don't know, and the irony of this is that with a collaboration, you can actually spoon feed the data scientist is now enabled to consult and give guidance to the end user on what they could be learning and using from it, as opposed to if it was done in a vacuum or in a silo or the back office, it's almost impossible to make that relationship happen to help them understand how they can be taking advantage of the models. So again, this whole collaboration element, which you just pointed out, Bill, is really the linchpin to bridging that gap.
Well, Bill, thank you for that answer. You know, one of the things that we noticed, Libin, during your presentation is that you called on the line of business users to actually execute or insert some code, as well as just clicking on the application icon. That may not be the easiest thing in the world for business users to do. Do you offer training specifically oriented toward business users? What sort of resources are available to help get them started?
Sure. So let me clarify something I probably came out wrong maybe during the demo. So the business user does not have to write any code. So all the coding in Moselle and in the XML would be done by the data scientist. The business user has to be trained in using Express Insight. So basically, their training would encompass how do you create a scenario, or how do you clone a scenario, or the different workflow features of Express Insight. And to that, we offer specific training for Express Insight along different levels. So we have some YouTube videos out there that basically talk about how to use Express Insight, or we can go to the completely other side of the spectrum, which is a classroom training where we sit down with the business, understand the problem, and then give them specific training on how to use Express Insight.
Well, Libin, thanks for
Can I just emphasize one thing there, Bill? It's important. Libin's first comment. In this session, we knew the audience was going to be primarily data scientists, so we really kind of peeled back the layer so you could see behind the scenes. But the reality is most of your business users are only going to see the finished application. They're not writing code. They're leveraging the application. That's the whole point of what Insight's reason is to be. And further, where we see a lot of the comments back from our customers is the ease with which they can consume these applications, because they're not in a data science speak. They're in a very simple to digest application. So the training for the business user tends to be nominal at best. They're not having to learn Insight. They're just using the application in most cases.
Well, Bill, Libin, thank you for that clarification. A bit of a technical question about Express Insight's ability to scale across perhaps hundreds of users, or is it necessary to do load balancing to distribute jobs across my compute resources?
Great question. So Express Insight, like we said before, is a client, or is built on a client-server architecture framework, right? So you have the users who are logging in through the browsers without having to install anything, but on the back end, it's actually a server-based system, right? So it's installed on a server, and the ability that it has is basically it's able to start up, or every job is executed on workers. And these workers scale horizontally, meaning you could have hundreds of workers. Basically, all they're doing is running these models. So Insight automatically handles the load balancing across these workers so that, you can have hundreds. I think we have use cases where we have 200 to 300 users using a single application, Express Insight, and Insight manages all of that server backend stuff for you, like load balancing and synchronization and all of those things. So it's a true enterprise-ready solution when you compare that to some things like, RShiny or some of those other softwares out there.
Oh, that's very interesting. Oh, thanks for that answer. Once again, I know that your presentation was largely on how to operationalize the results of these models, but there's a question from the audience that asks about the front end, and that is what capabilities broadly do you have that allow you to get to the model building stage? Maybe you want to talk for a minute about ingest and blending and cleaning and that sort of stuff.
Sure. So with respect to the model development processes, right? So what Express Insight gives you is that standardized framework for doing those analyses, right? So through Express Insight or through Moselle, you can build some of those things, but let's say you're building that already in R and Python, right? So what Express Insight can give you is a standardized way of doing all of those steps that you take to basically build a model, right? So that it kind of helps in multiple ways, but one of the key ways I think it helps is giving the standardized framework, right? So you can have multiple teams working on Express Insight having a similar way of building models, and more importantly, it also allows to store all of that steps, right? So tomorrow, if you have a regulatory process or a governance process where you have to go back and take a look at, hey, what did I do when I built that model? What data did I use, right? You have these scenarios basically holding on to that information that you can go back and look at. And you know that everybody on your data science team, if they follow the same steps, that when they build a new model, that they have followed all of those.
Oh, terrific. Oh, Liven, thanks for that answer. Also kind of on the front end of things, and I believe this question really refers to the data scientist users, is it while your data scientists are building these apps, if they have questions unique to Express Insight, is there a resource that they can use, or where do they go to get their questions answered during development?
Great question. So we have an Express Optimization user forum. So it says Express Optimization, but it's basically a user forum for using any of the Express products, right? So this is an online community that you can go to, post questions over there. We have a lot of experts on that group, and you'll get an answer almost immediately, or if not within a couple of days. The other place that you can go to is all our documentation is online as well. So this is extensive documentation on the features of Express Insight and Moselle, specifically when it comes to tying to Python and R. We also have a set of YouTube videos on how you would build an application in Express Insight as well. So I think through all of these avenues, you should be able to get your questions answered on building applications in Express Insight.
Oh, well, Liven, thank you. That sounds very complete. And time for maybe one last question. You mentioned that you actually are able to issue licenses for Tableau. Are there any other applications that you license that we should know about?
For the Insight framework, the only visualization front end that we license with it is Tableau. And Liven discussed the different ways you can integrate with other visualization front ends.
Okay, well, terrific. Hey, Bill, Liven, thank you for some great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you that asked questions today that weren't answered, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to Bill, Liven, and the FICO team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for February 14th. That's our next DSC webinar, which will be Ask Data, Simplifying Analytics with Natural Language. So remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Also, all of our past webinars are also available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest into our data science community. So this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and their thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to FICO for their sponsorship, as well as to our speakers today, Bill Doyle and Libin Varghese, for their insight into today's topic. So this is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on February 14th. Have a great day.